Hey everybody, and welcome to one of the last sessions of today. I just want to thank all of you for being here on this beautiful semi-cold Friday here in Boone. And I'm super excited to introduce Megan and David and their presentation, Sharing the Responsibility, Librarians and Faculty Developing a Community Around Information Literacy. So Megan and David, when you are ready, take it away.
All right, thank you guys so much for being here. This is going to be the session, Sharing the Responsibility, Librarians and Faculty Developing a Community Around Information Literacy. And this presentation is going to describe what we call the Joiner Library Information Literacy Community of Learning for faculty and instructors here at East Carolina University. So let's start off with some introductions. My name is Megan Juanita Smith, and I'm the Coordinator of Instructional Assessment at Joiner Library. I also teach classes and students in the social sciences. And this is my pup, Mr. Fizz.
Dogs are the new cats. My name is David Heisel, and I'm the Learning Technologies Librarian in the Research and Instructional Services Department here at ECU's Joiner Library. And this is the latest addition to the Heisel family, Andromeda Starfire Heisel, my 7-year-old named the dog. I should say right off that I'm also a bit of a latecomer to this particular project. Megan and our former science librarian, Leah Cordova, had already accomplished much of the planning. In fact, had already gotten the grant when I joined, and I'm so grateful to both of them for letting me participate.
David has been such a trooper. We roped him in sort of halfway through this, especially as a sort of a framework skeptic, I might say. So his expertise has really been instrumental, which you will see momentarily. But first, we wanted to hear from you. You know, the ACRL framework has been out for a while now. What have you been doing with it? In the chat window, tell us a little bit about your experiences sharing the framework with faculty or any other non-library folks.
I guess we can keep an eye on that. Oh, we've got some comments.
Cool.
Workshops with dual enrollment instructors.
Yeah, awesome. And yeah, and definitely, like, even if you haven't shared yet, you have plans, that's great. And it can definitely be intimidating, the idea of like translating this library specific thing to people who are not library professionals.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Well, thank you for sharing that. We'll jump over to think about more in the question and answer part of the period of this presentation. But first, David is going to talk to us a little bit about our inspiration for this project.
Absolutely. It was November of 2017. A handful of us at Joiner Library attended a terrific day-long workshop at UNCW on engaging with the ACRL framework. It was a dense, genuinely helpful dive into the framework, the frames themselves, and how we might engage with and integrate the framework into the work we do as librarians. I think many of us were experiencing anxiety with the framework at the time and its role in our work. Maybe some of us still are. But this was suddenly a manageable thing. The framework wasn't just a responsibility or a guiding document that we needed to find a purpose for. The framework was a positive opportunity. Not just to revise, reconsider our ways of instructing and supporting the student population, but also connecting with campus faculty, making information literacy a shared responsibility. As to our local situation, our instruction program at Joiner is largely one-shot instruction, which we all know can be frustrating for scaffolding information literacy concepts, across a student's college career. Granted, it's wonderful to have those 1-hour opportunities with the students, but how do you implement the framework in a single hour? Absolutely, this was a responsibility that we would need to share beyond the library classroom, which meant developing meaningful dialogues with our teaching faculty. So how did we approach that?
And especially for us, again, like David mentioned, in a context in which we didn't necessarily have these kinds of relationship with faculty. So how can we actually entice them to work with us, whether it's assignment design, course plans, reworking a library instruction session? We had some of these sort of one-off relationships, but we really wanted to develop something that was a bit more intentional. So we decided, hey, there are grant funds out there. Let's try and apply for one. And at that time, Joiner Library had just launched a new internal grant initiative called Make a Difference, where library staff could pitch ideas for new projects. We knew our Office of Faculty Excellence was a great resource for faculty professional development, and bonus points, it's located here in Joiner Library.
Yes.
So we came up with the idea to develop an information literacy and framework flavored workshop series through that office. And we used grant funds to pay for lunch because, hey, free food is always good, even for faculty, students too. We held this 3-part workshop series in April 2018 and had a really great response. We had about 9 people at each session from a variety of disciplines. We even had a handful of folks who actually came to all 3 sections. We were shocked. We couldn't believe it. Of course, that being said, we knew that 3-hour-long sessions is really nowhere near enough to grapple with the framework completely. So given the success of that initial workshop series, we said, you know what, we're going to go big. So we applied for a Library Services and Technology Act, or LSTA, EASY grant through the State Library of North Carolina to pitch a year-long program, the Joiner Library Community of Learning, where we'd work with 10 ECU instructors and faculty to integrate information literacy concepts more intentionally throughout their classes. And the goal is relatively open-ended. We're supporting those 10 faculty in their efforts to rework library instruction sessions, class assignments, teaching plans, or syllabi for spring 2019 classes based on concepts from the framework. Our program model was informed by Joiner and UNC Greensboro's successful alternative textbook grant program, which offered mini grants to faculty creating open educational resources, as well as the plethora of other information literacy programs that are out there specifically for faculty at places like UNC Greensboro, UNC Wilmington, Fayetteville State, who we saw speak at an NCLA conference in 2017, as well as many others. And shock of shocks, we got the grant. So our next step was pretty daunting. How do we actually get 10 people to sign up for this thing? And that's where marketing came into play.
Well, as we look to promote the program, we first tapped into those people who had attended the spring workshops, where Megan and Leah had first introduced this idea of a community of learning centered around information literacy and the framework. We had our departments, the folks we work with closely. We had our library's power users, those folks who say yes to everything. In addition to that, the library, the Office for Faculty Excellence, sent out mass emails promoting the workshop series. We kept eligibility requirements as broad as possible, essentially anyone who taught a class. So that might even be an admissions or a transfer office staff person who's teaching a co-ed that semester. Since the program would run a year and include multiple Office for Faculty Excellence sessions, we also considered branding. Gears were a metaphor that Leah Cordova chose for the spring workshops. I think it's a terrific way to sort of illustrate how all these sort of pieces need to connect in order for this thing to work. So we went with gears and of course Pirate Purple.
So all of these marketing efforts encouraged interested folks to submit proposals in which they described what their students seemed to be struggling with when it came to information literacy. We also asked them to share ideas for how to incorporate information literacy into their classes and what their goals would be for participating in the program. We were, after all, trying to build a community here. So we reviewed these proposals with extra weight being given to those who were teaching classes with general education credit and high enrollment. So who did we actually get? We actually got 10 people. We couldn't believe it. We had 8 different departments represented. We had 2 instructors from social work and 2 from English composition. And we ended up with a few of our participants wanting to try out information literacy ideas in a couple of classes. So we're now sitting at 17 sections of classes being taught this semester to 558 students. So these 10 participants were starting off working with us and with each other and sort of building their own capacity to rework assignments, class discussions, or library instruction sessions to the classes that they're now teaching. So once we had our 10 participants, we offered several professional development opportunities to beef up their knowledge of the framework and information literacy concepts throughout the fall semester. First, we offered the workshop series from our Make a Difference grant again, after tweaking and reworking a few sections based on what we had learned during that spring series. We met with folks for individualized coaching sessions, and then we developed additional resources, which David will talk about in a moment. We also hosted a Blackboard course for the participants to sort of host discussion questions and resource sharing, and this was where we really attempted to bring that community aspect. This spring, like I mentioned, we're in the midst of implementing those interventions now, and we'll be sharing examples of those here in a minute. We've also started running our program evaluation phase, during which faculty and students in the classes have completed pre-surveys, and they'll be doing post-surveys at the semester end. But first, let's talk about those workshop sessions that we held back in October and November.
Now, I missed those spring workshops, but I recall being fascinated by the conversations you and Leah had about them. What we did in the fall, we had 3 workshops centered on these themes: thinking critically about information literacy in the disciplines, and teaching critical information literacy. The workshops were largely attended by those in the community of learning, but we had other attendees as well who provided their disciplinary perspectives, and we accomplished a couple of things. We had the opportunity to formally present the framework concepts to our participants, to our faculty. The framework's introduction notes that that the framework opens the way for librarians, faculty, other institutional partners to redesign instruction sessions, assignments, courses, curricula. And I feel like the workshops got us well on the way to accomplishing that. As you'll see on this image, this was the sea of Google that a psychology faculty drew to sort of illustrate what types of information and what authorities are valued in his field. And then also those points where students weren't quite getting there. Now the workshops provided us with the opportunity to begin this conversation with engaged campus faculty from a range of different disciplines. And these weren't just conversations with us either. These were conversations that the faculty were having with each other about their own practices. What are their information literacy priorities? What strategies have failed or succeeded in moving that needle on student information literacy? What do they consider success, and where do they as faculty need support from us?
In this particular image, you can see how faculty were talking about information literacy with pretty different terminology. We had asked them in this exercise to pair up and define what information literacy is and what it is not. So in green here is what the faculty came up with, and we kind of did some facilitating exercises with them. But you can see the terminology here is something that's not really library specific. You see terms like critical thinking, self-trust, having access to information. Sure, that sounds good for us. And you can see here as part of our discussion, I did add the term information privilege there. But notice that, again, these are really familiar concepts and dispositions and knowledge practices from the framework. You have open mindset mentioned, considering your own biases, and things like knowledge practices where you might evaluate and synthesize information. In this particular case, the participants were talking a lot about the process of information. You can see that along the left, sort of access, retrieve, filter, these sort of different stages. And they were focusing on the idea that information literacy was not necessarily tool-based, that understanding a given application, maybe what we might think of like digital natives or being tech savvy, wasn't necessarily the same thing as being information literate. They also spoke about just kind of broad focuses on understanding how systems were working. And again, all of these slides, these images were from our very first workshop session, which was about information literacy broadly. We actually hadn't really completely taken a deep dive into the framework yet. So you can see there's stuff kind of sprinkled in there already. This is getting back to David's point about information literacy being a shared responsibility. These are some really big ideas that are being brought up. Of course, the workshops themselves were only the first step. We wanted to make sure that our participants had additional resources as they started planning ways to integrate framework concepts into their spring classes.
We provided the participants with iPads as a way of engaging them with the program, but also for sharing content. One potential advantage of iPads is that the whole community has a shared platform. So we purchased ebooks for the community, which work nicely with iPads, of course. Shared links to further readings, shared apps, and so on. What was on the iPads can be found on the program LibGuide, which I believe we'll be sharing it at some point today. I should note that the iPads weren't nearly as essential to all that as I think we anticipated. Personally, I wouldn't hesitate to put on this program again without iPads. I don't think that they're what's engaging the faculty, but of course, we'll look at the surveys at the end of the spring semester to be sure about that.
So we also met with folks individually to help them brainstorm and apply what they learned from all of these resources. With a couple of our participants, we actually met with them a couple of times to really work through and brainstorm ideas. I think a lot of these sessions were just us coming up with ideas, and they really just had to kind of sit and grapple with, what do I actually want to do? What are the goals here? And so you'll see here at the end of the semester in December, we asked them to say, okay, you know what, we're done now. The planning is done. And here are my plans of what I'm intending to implement in this spring semester. So we did ask them to tell us which frames they included in their teaching plans. And I find it interesting that, given the variety of disciplines that we have participating in the program, it's interesting to see how many of them actually included the same 3 frames: information creation as a process, searching as strategic exploration, and scholarship as conversation. As part of that sort of program submission, we also asked them to characterize the changes that they made, knowing what our perceptions were of what they were planning were probably going to be pretty different than what they had thought. And you can see here that everyone reported reworking an assignment to some degree, with teaching plans being pretty common as well. And what I find interesting is that for most people, the answer was not a library instruction session or necessarily library resources. Granted, we might have characterized our involvement as being somewhat library instruction or resource related, but they didn't necessarily characterize it that way. So this again being our point that informational literacy is something kind of beyond just the library, this seems to sort of affirm that idea. So what do these interventions actually look like? Let's get to some examples.
Now, Megan and I collaborated on some of these interventions. We tackled some of them individually. We approached the project, having our own respective skill sets and interests, and we tried to allocate the work accordingly. All of the interventions were multi-pronged, and I was especially interested in those interventions that we could scale up or duplicate in other classes. Our social work faculty person with a DE graduate course was an interesting case for me. After attending the workshops in a 2-on-1 consultation with Megan and myself, he made some significant changes to his spring class. And not all were strictly information literacy based, which I found interesting. A major concern of his was that students were preparing for a license requirement. So one part of his solution was simply adding additional sample test questions to his Blackboard course. He also wanted to improve the quality of the sources that his students were using for a research-based assignment. So we brainstormed the idea of a discussion assignment that asked students to post and review each other's sources, a sort of a student peer review of the sources that they were using on their assignments, to be done in advance of that assignment. The faculty also wanted to improve access and awareness of library resources, in particular videos and those resources related to the license exam that his students would need to take. We had an existing social work addiction counseling program guide, which we made more robust based on suggestions from this faculty person. And I should note, media resources, streaming films, embedded films, are probably underrepresented in our guides generally, at least at Joiner Library. I don't know if it's our perception that media lack rigor or that they're not appropriate for most assignments, or if it's simply our lack of awareness over some of those core titles. But video content for LibGuides came up in several faculty conversations, and that's a lesson I'm filing away for the future. What's great about these one-on-one consultations with faculty is that some of these essential titles can get teased out and then made available to the students. Those conversations can, of course, also identify existing gaps in library coverage. So to make the library resources more findable in his Blackboard course, we added 2 new elements, which you see here on the screen. This includes links to beefed up LibGuide, both the title and page level links to the guide, links to essential databases, guide on the side tutorial for Sociindex, links to related guides. But to make the content more findable, the faculty and I had a second consultation where we added select page level LibGuide links to the main content menu in Blackboard. While we often create content folders for Blackboard courses, adding top-level links to LibGuide pages was something we hadn't tried before. So I was very curious whether or not that would be effective. Does findability of library resources make much of a difference? It's early, but I would note that we saw a big increase in hits to the guide this January. And for the most part, these aren't editing hits. You can see we got 100 in January of this year. In fact, these aren't even LibGuide homepage hits. These are hits directly to the LSAS testing resources. The page is pretty solid and it was useful before, but now the students encounter it at their point of need. And we've definitely seen a big change in usage statistics. Another case was our foreign languages and literatures faculty member. Her research-based assignment did not require lots of sources, but she wasn't happy with those that she was seeing. More generally, she felt her students lacked awareness of library resources and books in particular, where some of the best material was available. This prevented her students from engaging more deeply with the reading list, with the course content. So we went to work. The faculty person and I collaborated on a library instruction session for a third week of classes, just in advance of the first annotated bibliography assignment that was due. To support that instruction, we created a research guide. The research guide aligns very, very closely with her syllabus, so it touches on each of the major content areas of her course. Where ECU Libraries owns an item from her list of recommended readings, we also included that. Where required films were available in streaming or physical format, we included those. And finally, we provided examples of further readings from the collection. And you can see down there in the lower left quadrant, sample additional titles from the Joiner Library collection. I should probably note that on the first of those annotated bibliography assignments that our students put together, a couple of the students used exclusively the sample titles list from the LibGuide as their only sources, rather than being inspired to do their own exploration. So we still may not be in the best of all possible worlds here. I'm very curious how the future annotated bibliographies our students will produce this semester turn out.
All right, so for another example, we've got our faculty member from nutrition, and she was working on a Nutrition 6500 class for pediatric nutrition. And this particular faculty member was really all in on the framework from the very beginning. We had shared print booklets of the framework, which are available from ACRL and are lovely just to have. I strongly suggest them. And we shared those at our welcome session way back in the fall. And not even 2 weeks later, she brought that booklet to the first workshop session, already highlighted, dog-eared, with Post-it notes all over it. She was here for it. And if you've ever worked with faculty from the health sciences area or in health education promotion kinds of areas, you'll know that health literacy really aligns quite well with various knowledge practices and dispositions from the framework. So she really came in with goals and expectations of her students that lined up quite nicely with the goals of our program. So for this particular class, it's a graduate level class online with a mix of students who are fresh out of undergrad as well as those that come in with some work experience. And ultimately, her goals were about students recognizing their own authoritative voices. I mean, these are future nutrition professionals, and she wanted them to actually start trusting the expertise that they were building in her classes. She reworked a couple of assignments, one including something called bracketing, which asks students to identify any previous knowledge or preconceptions about a topic before reading more about it. Might be helpful in a lot of contexts. And she also then created a new teaching plan that you can see here using a backward design worksheet from our workshop series. Here you can see examples from the actual assignment descriptions where she included new learning outcomes, specifically including ideas about authority and building credibility. Again, straight from the framework. We also created a LibGuide to point students to newspaper databases and evaluating health information resources to complement these new assignments. You see the opinion editorial analysis paper there, pointing students to where to find quality opinion editorials, as well as evaluating health information, something critical for health literacy. That LibGuide was just released next week, I believe, so we don't have those lovely numbers like David showed earlier from social work, but we'll see how that turns out. And for our final example for today, we're going to talk about criminal justice. In this particular case, I had worked with a faculty member before in a senior level writing intensive class. Pretty bread and butter when it comes to our library instruction program. We target those writing intensive classes knowing that there's going to be some research-based assignment. For this particular class, Justice 2004, semester, Crime and Criminality, this was based on theory. Students were being taught about theories. So this was something that was brand new for me to think about, especially when it came to the framework. Again, I hadn't been used to sort of classes that were just about content and theory specifically, so this was something new for me to learn about. This particular instructor had actually been with us back at the spring workshops. So again, she was another person who was really on board with this idea on doing this more intentionally in terms of integrating informational literacy ideas. One thing to note for her, she had actually been in an adjunct position during the spring workshops and then became a full-time instructor this fall. So for her, participating in this program is really about her showing to her colleagues that she is here for student learning and for improving her own teaching practice. Something that we had sort of thought might be a nice side benefit, but is becoming really important for those participating in our program. For this particular class, we've actually got 3 sections of relatively large classes. These were 60 to 75 students per section, who are mostly first year or sophomores, who are all criminal justice majors. Her goals for this particular class included encouraging students to connect theory to practice. You know, all undergrads love theory. So she wanted them to recognize how theory is developed and how it's determined to be credible, especially in a newer field like criminal justice. So she used class discussions and teaching plans to kind of sprinkle framework ideas throughout the entire class. And she's intending to actually integrate all of the frames into the class generally. Curious to see how that works out. But specifically, she created a new group project that asks students to investigate a particular theory and its application in the field. And then she's asking them to actually talk with each other as theorists to mirror that scholarship as conversation frame. Another goal of hers was to encourage students to look outside scholarly resources for their group projects. So we also incorporated a new library instruction session about how theory credibility is built and evaluating information more generally. So you can see here, these are just a few examples. We basically are ending up with 10 mini test cases that are still being just sort of implemented and out there in the world. But of course, we're already thinking about what's happening next. Like David described, we're going to be evaluating the program through some pre and post surveys of the participants as well as the students in their classes, and then providing some train the trainer resources at the end of the semester to help our participants share ideas back in their home departments after the program ends. And of course, as a part of that, we're also planning a celebration at the end of the semester to really highlight all of the efforts that these folks have done. I think we're both just overwhelmed by the engagement that these folks have had with us and with this program. And ultimately, though, that program evaluation piece is really going to help us figure out which program components are the most helpful. Like we had talked about earlier, we kind of think the iPads maybe weren't critical. It'd be great if they weren't, so then we could probably do this again. But if it is something that, oh, they really need a little bit more of an enticement, then we may need to be looking at funding sources. But our hope is ultimately, if nothing else, to offer consultations to faculty on assignment or class redesigns to help incorporate information literacy ideas moving forward. But to wrap up, a few closing thoughts just on the program so far. I find it fascinating that we have programs or participants with similar goals or problem areas to target. We had a couple of folks talk about citation mining, building authority, and how to sort of understand credibility from a contextual standpoint, and that they haven't really classified our interventions as library specific. And of course, this kind of leads to our goal of helping and build their capacity, having them actually do some of this work. And it seems to actually be bearing out. I'm shocked still. And like I mentioned too, I've actually stretched my own teaching and learning as we've been supporting these faculty too. I have not spent so much time in Scopus ever. So this has been really great for me.
Yeah, it's been a wonderful experience. I think it's worth noting that it's fairly time intensive. So particularly if you get that really engaged faculty person who's emailing you multiple times a week, it's great to see. It's great to have that information, that insight. But it will eat up some of your work week. But generally, this community of learning has really illustrated well to me the utility of collaborating on information literacy concepts. Megan often says that information literacy doesn't live in the library, that it's not a thing we own. Absolutely. We can't support information literacy, for our students alone, any more than our faculty can. So I wanted to thank you for giving us a little bit of your time today. I always enjoy opportunities to learn from each other as librarians, and I look forward to hearing your strategies for engaging faculty, implementing the framework, or any other thoughts or questions that you may have, in chat here so shortly.
Yeah, and we did mention too, we've included a link here. We do have a LibGuide specifically for this community of learning, so that link is there. But that's it. So we thought we would kind of lead into the question and answer period with a question for you all. What ideas have you had? I know we've got some folks maybe who haven't necessarily tried talking with faculty about the framework specifically. Do you have any ideas? What are your strategies moving forward? And tell us about that. And of course, we're open to any questions that you may have. And again, thank you for coming today.
And folks, feel free to just unmute yourself if you don't want to type it all out on the chat box. There's not too many of us in the room, so it should be okay.
Well, we appreciate you attending, Kristen and Brittany.
Yeah. Ooh, an instructional designer. Yeah. See, and I'm lucky that David actually has some instructional design background, so that's kind of built in. But yeah, I mean, I think like David had mentioned earlier, so often it's the faculty are learning so much from each other. In fact, we actually had one participant who was like, you know what, I can't wait till the end of the semester. I really want to like get together with everybody in person again. So we're in a couple of weeks, we're just going to go like hang out after work and just kind of talk through what people are going through, and also just to, again, try and build up that community a little bit more. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's an excellent point. I think when you can't take on anymore, something like this can help you share that responsibility, of course, and name of our presentation, but that it is something that is trainable. I mean, it is shareable, and that can be an absolutely a great way to build up your own capacity while you're building up others to try and do that too. I know I've seen some examples where libraries will host like workshops, like kind of like what we talked about, but instead of the full year-long program, they'll just do maybe something intensive over the summer. So you can think about, you know, if your Office of Faculty Excellence does any kind of or the equivalent does any kind of sort of, we've got like a teaching with technology sessions that happen over the summer, some statistics workshop series that go over the summer, that might kind of help pull in some ideas there. But I kind of envy you, Brittany, a little bit.
I will say that the one, not missing piece of expertise, but the one other party that was particularly helpful was our ITCS here on campus. Some of the things we did, particularly with Blackboard, ITCS was really helpful in implementing. So once again, it's not just in the library. It's not just with the faculty either.
That's awesome. Yes, there's so many fellows for him. Yes, and I think we've yeah, from Fayetteville State. Yep, awesome. And I think when we heard Representative from Fayetteville State talking about this program, you guys had just started implementing ideas from the framework because it had been standards based. Is that something that's how's that program looking right now?
I think it's going good. Yeah, so we are in the initial process now. Yeah, we are working now. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I know, and we loved your program too, with all the professional development built in, and to include librarians from across the library to kind of partner with faculty. That was definitely like, that's the dream.
That's a dream always. You know? Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, I guess if you guys don't have any other questions, again, thank you so much for coming to hang out with us on a Friday afternoon. I know it looks like the warm weather, at least here in North Carolina, is going to fade very quickly. But hopefully you can get out there and enjoy what sunshine might be left. And we appreciate it. Thanks so much for spending the time with us today.
Yeah, and please get in touch with us. Our emails are on the screen. We'd love to continue the conversation later on if you want to idea share or bounce ideas off us. Yeah. Of course, we'd love to hear what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you, David. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.